Good morning. My name's Sheriff Charles Chuck Jenkins. I'm from Frederick County, Maryland. I've been sheriff up there for 9 years. We're located about 1 hour northwest of Washington right here. It's a beautiful county, beautiful community, population of about 240,000 people. Like I said, I've been in law enforcement 25 years locally. Sheriff is 9 of those years. I sit on 2 committees of the National Sheriff's Association, the Homeland Security Committee, and also the Immigration and Border Security Committee. I feel that I can speak with some authority to the issues we're talking about today. I think I can also give you a real good local perspective, and I'm a very strong proponent of law enforcement cooperating with ICE. The Frederick County Sheriff's Office during my tenure has had a very successful relationship with ICE. It works through our 287G partnership program. We implemented that in 2008. When Secure Communities came online, we were the second county in the state of Maryland to go online with that program. Since the inception of 287G to date, we've placed detainers on 1,355 criminal illegal aliens in Frederick County, people who were in this country illegally in our county and committed crimes against our citizens. 1,234 of those criminals were turned over to ICE and placed into removal proceedings. There have been a total of 166 prosecutorial releases during that period of time. I want you to really listen to this because this is important. Included in that number, 43 validated transnational criminal gang members, 30 additional suspected gang members. Among those, 14 of those had specialized training in military sniper, commando, night fighting, and martial arts. Those are the types of individuals that are coming across our borders into our communities. In 2014 alone in Frederick County, 8 detainers were placed on detainees charged with rape and sexual offenses on children between the ages of 5 and 14. Crimes committed for those alien removals also include aggravated assault, rape and sex offenses, assault on law enforcement, domestic violence, drug trafficking, burglary, theft, and child abuse. Folks, we've accomplished this with no drain on local resources or tax dollars. Our partnership with ICE has become just a course of what we do normally in our detention center. It's a really easy program. All you have to do is have the will to do it. As a sheriff of Frederick County, there are a couple other points I want to talk about this morning. And listen, believe me, this is all about, in my world, this is all about public safety, national security, and the rule of law in the United States of America. The first and most critical point, I think, is ICE detainers on individuals in our country illegally must be honored by sheriffs, jails, prisons, state and local law enforcement from coast to coast. Not to honor those detainers knowingly and releasing these people back onto our streets is, I think, a dereliction of duty. I think it's wrong, and it jeopardizes the safety of our citizens. This is why we're here today. This is exactly what we're talking about. You know, we see this so many times, day in, day out, week in, week out. It just so happens now the untimely death and the tragic death of Kate Steinle, I think, has driven this point to where it is today. I think, number one, effective information sharing between law enforcement, state, federal, local, is critical to agency cooperation, and it's just not done. To honor these detainers and to protect American citizens, we have to have a tighter source of information sharing. And I can also attest, as a local law enforcement agency, you don't have to be in a partnership. You don't have to make a commitment to ICE. They're not looking for a program partner. They're simply looking for cooperation. They're looking for me as a sheriff to pick up the phone, or they're looking for me as a sheriff to pick up the phone when they call to say, Sheriff, we have an individual with a detainer. Will you hold him? Yes, we will in Frederick County. I think that every sheriff across this country, every law enforcement agency is obligated and should step up and, in effect, become a force multiplier for ICE, because that's what we do. The dynamic of law enforcement has changed in this country. The dynamic of crime, all the criminal gang activity has changed the face of what we do on the streets, and we need to face it. This is a part of it. So I do think we have a role in it. I think that non-cooperation and not honoring these detainers actually creates a sanctuary jurisdiction. It does not protect, but in fact jeopardizes your community. Again, we've seen it time after time. Tragedies play out day after day. People are killed, murdered, raped, robbed, traffic crashes that kill our citizens. And again, many of these people are released from local jails and turned right back out onto the streets, simply for lack of cooperation. In my mind, there's no reason that an ICE detainer can't be handled in the exact same way as a state-to-state fugitive warrant. Okay, different authorities, but you could really simplify this process just like we do fugitive warrants on a daily basis. There are several jurisdictions here in Virginia and Maryland which are non-cooperating cities and counties, in effect sanctuaries. There was a recent case where a convicted sex offender that had a detainer that was not honored was released back onto the street and offended again. I'll tell you this, in Frederick County, there's much less chance of an occurrence like this in my county than there is in these sanctuary counties and jurisdictions. I believe that federal legislation should be passed to empower and mandate that all state and local law enforcement will cooperate with ICE in situations where ICE detainers are placed for holds. And Congressman, I would be very supportive of anything you would introduce like that, and certainly encourage the national sheriffs to be there with you. That legislation, I believe, should also include limited authority for state and local law enforcement. Because remember what I said, the face of what we do on the streets every day has changed dramatically over the years. When you look at the cost of the enforcement, it's much more cost efficient when we encounter and turn over a criminal alien in a controlled environment like the jail, rather than to make ICE have to go back out onto the street like Jessica had talked about and go through the process all over again. It takes much more time, effort, resources, and manpower that's expended by ICE to go back out on the street and take custody of that person and you just let out of jail a week ago. It frankly doesn't make sense. It also saves local tax dollars because that offender does not now get rearrested and come back into your local jail. The Senate and House should be encouraged, I think, by all sheriffs and police chiefs to pass the Davis-Oliver Act. They were the two officers killed in California by the previously deported criminal alien who was a known Mexican Pride criminal gang member. And again, I'm calling for all sheriffs and all chiefs to support this act in the Senate. My question to you, I think, is when are we Americans going to be outraged? When are we going to have enough? Kate Steinle should never have died. She should be alive today. There should never be another tragedy in America like that. A little bit of leverage, I think, to cooperate with ICE, and I think the Congressman mentioned funding. The SCAP funding, money given to local jails and detention centers to support these efforts to house federal detainees. If you don't cooperate, cut them off. Folks, because I can tell you as a sheriff, dollars motivate action. Secure communities, and I'll talk, which is now replaced with PEP, and I'm really disappointed in that. I think this really waters down the program almost to the point of being ineffective. This new framework of priorities to transfer criminal aliens from state and local custody severely restricts the ability of ICE agents to do their jobs, and again, jeopardizes public safety. Again, I can speak to the fact that ICE agents in the fields want to carry out their mission. They're looking for our help. They're looking for local law enforcement. In effect, what ICE is doing, what DHS is doing by allowing illegal immigrants who continually commit less serious crimes to eventually become aggravated felons and more violent criminals before eventually taking custody and taking the steps necessary for removal. I think as I thought back a little bit, where are we today with this? I think going back to the 50s, 60s, even into the 70s and 80s, any immigrant charged and convicted of any crime was deported and could never return legally to the country. How did this get so far out of hand? I don't think anybody can answer that. My other question would be to this administration, and no one will ever answer it, is why is DHS waiting for criminals to become more serious offenders and violent criminals and prioritizing only aggravated felons for removal? One fact that really jumps out at me is that nationwide, ICE has 34,000 beds available for alien removals. Under the current priority policy of PEP, they are not filling the beds that are available for removal. Why are we not filling the beds? Why prioritize if we're not meeting our numbers now? Okay, why are we prioritizing for removal when we simply can't fill the beds we have? Currently in Maryland, only 200 of the roughly 450 beds available are being utilized on a daily basis. I house detainees at the Frederick County Detention Center. Our numbers are down. They're down because of this new program. Also wanted to talk a bit about this so-called chilling effect that Jessica spoke of. And I can tell you from a local perspective, it simply does not exist. There's been no decline in reporting of crime in any of our immigrant communities. Again, she mentioned studies. There's studies from the Bureau of Justice, the Police Executive Research Forum, and others that have shown there is no meaningful decline in reporting of crime or in the trust of law enforcement. As a matter of fact, I can tell you this, and I pick up my phone and I get calls from people in the immigrant communities that are legal immigrants, that are naturalized citizens, that go all the way back to the Cambodian refugees from the Vietnam era. Some of my biggest supporters in Frederick County are people in these communities that say, hey, Sheriff, listen, we're offended by what's going on in our community. Thank you for what you're doing in your agency. Thank you for supporting the law, for enforcing the law. Because listen, is this not a quality of life issue? Is any community not safer if we take a criminal out of there? I say yes, it is. Just a few other points I want to make about the courts and sentencing. Immigration hearings and decisions by judges should be more timely, again, to allow ICE to do their job. Because of distant court hearings, because sometimes court dates now are probably in some cases as long as 3 years out, the illegal immigrants disappear, never show, so we don't know who they are until there's an encounter with law enforcement. Partiality in sentencing, and by this I mean when in many cases, and I know in Maryland in many cases, when a foreign-born offender is sentenced, he or she receives a much lighter sentence than an American-born offender. Why? The thought process is, okay, we give them a shorter sentence, a lesser sentence, with the thought being when they're released, they're going to be deported. Well, the flaw in that theory is it never happens. So again, offenders are placed back out on their streets. Again, why? Because of the failure to cooperate and communicate. The other thing, far too many asylum requests are granted to criminals. There are mechanisms in place in the immigration courts to grant asylum. Far too many are granted to criminals, particularly gang members. I'll give you a case in point. A green card holder had various violent crimes, but because judges were so lenient on sentencing, DHS was not able to capture the violent behavior because there was not enough sentencing for removal. The offender was released and committed a murder fairly soon after that. I went last year to McAllen, Texas, to the border to see for myself how bad the problem was in the border counties and the border states. Really was an eye-opener. It was probably, I expected that, but it really does open your eyes to see the impact to the border counties of the people streaming, the hundreds of thousands of people streaming across our borders into the United States. And I'll ask you to just keep this in mind. The Washington area, D.C., Virginia, Maryland, is only a 2-day drive from the border. So the very same problems that we see in our border states and border counties, we will very soon become a border state and border county. The hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants coming across will never see an immigration hearing, and they'll not be identified until at some point they have an encounter with law enforcement. Those illegal immigrants are not vetted. We don't know who they really are. The congressman spoke about terrorists coming across our borders. Yes, indeed, they do. We know they're here. We know there are cells in this country, probably in this close proximity. In my state of Maryland, there are an additional 5,000 illegal immigrants since the surge last year, most of them unaccompanied children. Inasmuch as I think that border security is probably going to be the cornerstone of our mission and what we have to accomplish first, nationally, I think the second biggest piece of this is the state and local law enforcement participating, working with ICE on these detainers. It just has to be done. And again, this is about keeping America safe. I go back to, my thought process is I go back to the point, this could be very simply done. It could be as simple as a state-to-state fugitive detainer. We do them every single day. And I guess I'll close by making a final point and a little brief analogy to think about with this new set of priorities created by set by this administration for enforcement and removal, basically only going after violent offenders and aggravated felons. Our first apprehension and detainer under our 287 program in Frederick County, and these are the circumstances. An illegal immigrant from El Salvador, actually an absconder who had already been ordered to be removed, okay, driving through a school zone during the school day, 65 miles per hour, with a blood alcohol content 3 times the legal limit. Now, my question to you, I want you to think about this. Was this illegal alien any less a public safety threat than the gang member, the rapist, the drug trafficker? I think the answer is pretty obvious to you and me both. If it was my child, I consider that a public safety threat. If it's your child, you would consider that a public safety threat. So, again, think about these things. Think about where we are, what we need to do as local law enforcement. I believe that as sheriff, I have an obligation. I took an oath. I take that seriously. I think every other sheriff and chief should feel the same way, to uphold the laws and the United States Constitution. And I think a part of that duty today has to be our commitment to work with ICE to get these criminals off our streets and out of the country. So, thank you.